Recently, I played through the entirety of Dark Souls. Again, for like the 20th time. It's been a couple of years, but it was like riding a bike. It was awesome. I was reminded of a lot of things about Dark Souls, the great and not so great boss fights, the intricate level designs, the complex lore, gravity. More importantly, I was reminded of an unpopular opinion I have about these games that I still uphold to this day, and I think now is a good time to talk about. Dark Souls 2, my friends. Most would agree that this is the worst game of the trio, and you know what? It's not hard to see why. I could write an essay about all the flaws that Dark Souls 2 has, and spoiler alert, that's kind of what this video is about. But for those who haven't played or have no idea what I'm talking about, let me give you a bit of a history lesson. Dark Souls 2, much like FromSoft's other games, is a difficult experience, but with so many artificial reasons for being difficult. Most of that difficulty doesn't even come from the boss fights, one of the greatest qualities that this series has. The level design is messier, enemy placement feels cheap, and most bosses just don't leave a lasting impression. But, to me, that doesn't make it a failure. It makes it very frustrating, yes, and that's worth exploring. Because understanding what almost worked can be just as valuable as studying what did. I think what really makes Dark Souls 2 such a hard game to accept is that it belongs to a company that rarely misses the mark in making a masterpiece. Like, if it was some random Souls-like, I think it would have been received with a little bit more positivity, but this comes from the same company that brought you Elden Ring, Bloodborne, the other Dark Souls games, Sekiro. I mean, all of these games are straight up some of the best games I've played. Even with Dark Souls 1's rushed development, it was a success, and it shouldn't have been. Dark Souls 2 was also rushed, but the key difference is the main director Miyazaki took a step back to work on Bloodborne, leaving these two guys to handle his sweet child. That's why the game feels so different when compared to the other Dark Souls games. That's why it has so many areas, so many pieces of lore that's never mentioned again. See, having that shift in leadership and ambitious ideas, you would think lead to the series' downfall. On the contrary, many critics and individual enjoyers loved the game at the time. Back in 2014, Dark Souls 2 was showered with praise for being different, but still having the difficulty that many people enjoyed. Although, this didn't last long. Once Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 were released, people started to rethink their thoughts on Dark Souls 2. They started to pinpoint those differences and realized, hey, maybe the game sucks. Then Scholar of the First Sin was released, a new and improved, updated edition, which didn't really help its case. Scholar changed a lot that vanilla Dark Souls 2 had, primarily the enemy placement. This is what led to mixed reviews at the time, and even to this day, many veterans are annoyed by those changes. Now, this is the version I'll be covering today because I never played vanilla Dark Souls 2, and Scholar also had the DLC, and I'm not trying to spend an extra 25 bucks, alright? Regardless, even with all the issues Dark Souls 2 has, I still love this game. Here's where some of you may riot and leave a dislike. I can accept that. But if you ask me, I think Dark Souls 2 is not only a great game, but I think it's better than Dark Souls 1. I understand I'm in court now, so let's officially dive into this can of worms. Without further ado, my name is Josh, and I hope you enjoy. Dark Souls 2 is, without question, the best, worst game I have ever played, and I will never defend the atrocities that this game has committed. It deserves jail time, if I'm being honest. There are three major issues that this game has: enemy placement, level design, and boss design. Let's start with enemy placement. Dark Souls 2 is like the end paragraph of a long essay in college. Just random things thrown in to make it look nice, to wrap it up, without any real care in the world. There are just too many enemies in almost every single area, especially Shrine of Amana and Iron Keep. It gives the illusion of natural difficulty, when in actuality, it's awful. Enemy placement should be placed evenly across the level. You can put them in groups, but make sure that specific group is far away from the other enemies. And I think what really doesn't help Dark Souls 2 is the fact that the aggro on these enemies is insane. They will chase you across the entire map. You need to make it feel like a cohesive experience, and of course, give your players the right amount of enemies to fight based on the mechanics you have in your game. In a game like Hades 2, you're gonna have about, I would say, a dozen enemies to fight at a time because you can do magic. and other things. But Dark Souls is a linear, more focused game. It's about understanding the patterns of an enemy and striking when the time is right. It's kinda hard to do when you have about 6 enemies attacking you at the same time. But what I think is important is to place them in a way that makes sense. In Iron Keep, you have knights patiently waiting in the middle of a bridge just to cause mayhem and to block your path. There's this one knight rubbing his butt crack against the fog gate just waiting for you to try. And you can't fight him because by the time you kill him, the other 20 knights have caught up. Side note, new director or not, what happened to the invincibility frames when entering a fog gate? Did they really need to change that? How many times have I been poked gingerly in the backside because my character wouldn't go through the gate in time? The answer is too many. In the Shrine of Amana, you have these maidens with some of the most aggressive tracking magic I've ever seen. They're placed in a way to counter the player's every option forward, rather than in a more natural position. Anytime you step away from cover, there's at least 2 of these sentient squirters trying to fire at you. Now, I don't mind if enemies are placed in a way to counter the player or attempt a surprise attack. That's fine. No Man's Wharf is okay at this, but then it ruins the whole thing with about, I would say, 50 archers, and they fire from a place where you can't even see them. The fact that I know where to run to avoid all the arrows shows how many times I've fallen victim to it. Dark Souls 3 loves to surprise the player, and the example that's ingrained into my mind is this little maggot who pushes you out from cover in the DLC. I died more times to that than I'm willing to admit, but when you do that in moderation and in places where it makes sense, such as near loot, then that's fine, because you recognize a pattern and become more aware. Dark Souls 2 does it way more than it should because it just wants to be quirky. Not that you'll get surprised by enemies, but you'll find too many of them just because. When the entire area has enemies placed to counter your every move, it becomes annoying. Hyde's Tower is a great early example. You have an abundance of these old knights, but at least they're separated from each other and they're quite slow. But then once you get to the end of the level, Hyde Knights and Old Knights will converge on you before you can get to the Dragon Rider boss. And good luck trying to run past them because those Hyde Knights are incredibly fast. And the area is so constrictive, you don't really have a lot of room for any options. I have to sometimes clear every single enemy just to simply get by, which becomes annoying very fast if I die even once to the boss. Sometimes the combination of enemies is just as brutal. The run to the Blue Smelter Demon is iconic for people who have played Dark Souls 2 because we all know it sucks. There are a lot of enemies, but nothing you can't run by without too much hassle. That is until you suddenly realize that gravity decided to get 10 times heavier. What is this, King Kai's planet? The reason being that there are these mages in each room on these like little bridges that can suddenly increase the weight of your character, making you slower and fat roll. And, you know, you have an entire army pursuing you, so it doesn't really help. I just don't get it. Like, I bought your game, I gave you my money, like, why are you punishing me? If you don't place enemies the right way, it ruins the overall fluidity and becomes aggravating to say the least. It doesn't feel like each level is in a natural state. Now, this time around when I played, it was definitely a smoother experience because I knew what to expect. But of course, I still had my moments of getting charged by knights or sniped by the mages. If there weren't as many enemies in these areas, then they might have been received with less resentment. I mean, I like the design of Iron Keep. I would take in the scenery if I didn't have the telemarketer of knights trying to shove their sword up my butt. The Shrine of Amana is also quite a beautiful area once the corpses have been laid to rest. However, Dark Souls 2 has some terrible areas where the enemy placement isn't even the main issue. Locations that obscure your vision are just plain awful. In Dark Souls 1, we have the Tomb of the Giants. You can't see a darn thing in here. It is a rite of passage to fall to your death in the Tomb of the Giants at least once. It is an experience that all of us have shared. If you ask me personally, it is one of my least favorite areas in Dark Souls. Now in Dark Souls 2, we have the Gutter. Not nearly as bad, because torches work down here and navigation is much easier. You can even light other torches to create a pathway. Still though, having the entire area shrouded in darkness makes it too easy to fall sometimes, especially the venture down into the gutter. All these wooden platforms and somehow I fall every single time. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Dark Souls games are not platformers, so I don't understand why they have so many areas that involve platforming. And after you get through the gutter, you get to the Black Gulch. It's saved by the fact that it's a very short area. You can run through the whole thing in about 20 seconds flat, but what makes it worth mentioning are the statues that shoot poison a lot. And here's something that I want you to know. Getting poisoned in other games is like getting stung by a wasp. Not a big deal. Dark Souls 2's poison is as if you're jerking off with a box jellyfish. I'm sorry for the mental image, but it's pretty much the same. And my question is, why so many of them? There are countless statues that hawk on you constantly. It's like it's trying to compensate for being such a short area that every step has to be miserable. Not to mention, invasions happen a lot down here. But of course, I can't talk about bad areas without mentioning perhaps the worst area in the entire series. Reindeer, screw me over land. I don't know. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, bless your heart. Stay away from the forbidden fruit. Leave it alone. Reindeer Screw Me Over Land is the last area I usually explore in the Ivory Crown DLC. What's that? DLC? You mean perhaps the best part about the game, right? The part where the developers improve upon what the base game did well and leave the player with a positive experience? No! It is an endless blizzard where you can't see what's 5 feet in front of you. But don't worry, you have about like 2 seconds to kind of get a vision of what's going on. And even after all this time, I still have no idea what the actual route is. And what's at the end of it? Is it worth it? It's not Santa's Workshop, I'll tell you that. It's a gank fight. Fantastic! I always try to find the reasoning behind a choice in a video game, or life in general. Like, why have a constant blizzard? Is it because we're in a winter DLC? Maybe, but the rest of the DLC doesn't obscure your vision at all. And there's still snow blowing around, so like, why start now? Does the lack of vision help intensify the situation in a good way? No, it doesn't. It's an artificial choice in difficulty because otherwise it would make for a rather boring area. I would prefer boring over annoying though. As a matter of fact, all the footage you're seeing is from a YouTube video. I didn't want to go back, lest my hairline push back further, and it's already bad as it is. But I still love Dark Souls 2. The honest truth is the areas and enemies were definitely more annoying than the actual bosses. And look at that, a perfect segue into my next issue. Dark Souls 2's bosses are a buffet of mediocrity. One of the best qualities about Dark Souls are the intense boss fights. They challenge your every move, all of what you accomplished thus far. They're a worthy test to see if you can compete with the rest of the game. Or they are bull crap. Dark Souls 2 treats bosses like they're flimsy dividers. See, most of them are there to create a transition between the previous and next area. Sometimes they're in the middle of an area, just randomly. Covetous Demon is about halfway through Earthen Peak, and there's no reason for it to be there besides the lore, I guess. The last boss in this area is a Medusa knockoff, and some guy in the lore thought, I want her to be mine. I know how I'll do it! I'm not making it up, by the way. He literally ate himself into a 4-ton slug, which honestly is kind of hot. Dark Souls 2 really is quantity over quality. There are a total of, brace yourself, 41 bosses in this game. 41! Dude, one of my favorite games of the moment, Monster Hunter Wilds, has about 30. Dark Souls 2 has more bosses than monsters in Monster Hunter Wild. It's crazy to me. You get to a point where you have so many bosses to create that the complexity and effort gets stretched very thin, leaving barely any room to stand out, and if they do, they don't stand out in a very good way. Most are so simple with a handful of attacks or gank fights that rail you for being present. I would argue that the Dark Souls 1 bosses are more complex. Some of my least favorites include Royal Rat Authority. It's a giant rat with smaller rats that can inflict toxic. And also, the skinny little legs are so hard to hit sometimes. It's gross. It's a gank fight, janky hitboxes, bad design, bad soundtrack, phenomenal. The Twin Dragon Riders. It's a reskin of an early game boss. Wow. Ava the King's Pet. An invisible tiger that gives you no clue on how to make it visible until much later into the DLC. Like, why make the boss invisible? I get it might be a roadblock to prevent players from going that route, but just put like a bunch of fat guys in the way like Pokemon does. That's a better way to do it. Also, if you're not gonna explain how to properly fight it, then just don't do it. Prowling Magus and Congregation. It's literally just a bunch of mobs. Look, we can agree that Dark Souls 2 doesn't have a great selection here. I think what upsets me the most is that they're not memorable. Some of my favorite boss fights ever are from the Dark Souls series. They're incredible challenges that are fun to overcome. Dark Souls 2 carries none of my favorites, and about 80% are mostly forgettable. They're too easy. Most of them die in less than 20 seconds without putting up much of a fight, and with a lot of builds too. Don't get me wrong, there are some pretty good fights like Fume Knight or Sur Alone, but when compared to the rest of the series, they fall short, even the good ones. To be fair, I do prefer a boss fight, even if it's bad, over going through another 5 minutes of a poorly built area with so many enemies. So there is mercy in that regard, but I think that just kind of tells you how bad the areas are in this game. I firmly believe that the run-up to a boss is also a part of their experience, especially in the older games. Dark Souls 2 has the worst run-ups in video game history. Sur Alone, great boss, terrible run-up. It is an iconic one, having about 100 knights blocking your path. It's honestly more difficult to get through than the actual fight. I already mentioned the Blue Smelter Demon, but the normal Smelter Demon is by far the worst one for me, which is the first half of Iron Keep. Ancient Dragon 2, now that I think about it, is pretty bad if you decide to run through without respecting the 1v1. Basically what happens is if you just run through without fighting the knight, the Dragon Knights will also chase you down. And look, it's already a slog to fight the dragon, and if I have to fight through a gauntlet just for a chance to fight him again, it's pretty bad. All in all, Dark Souls 2 doesn't have a great roster. There are a few gems, but most are dirt that you have to sift through to find them. But I still love Dark Souls 2. Alright, so now I want to throw at you some other miscellaneous problems that tie this whole thing together. The holification process. When I talk about artificial difficulty in this game, this is the main kicker to the groin. It is the bow on top of this garbage pile. It really is. You will die so many times in this game, and each time you die, your maximum health is reduced by 5%. It's already bad enough that I'm dying and losing my money and have to go get it back, but to reduce my health pool is rude. Essentially, the game is punishing you for being bad at the game. The difficulty is already enough of a challenge, on top of the unfair circumstances. But to add an unwanted limitation for no reason at all, like just spit on me at that point. If you keep on dying, your health bar can reduce to a max of 50%. But how do you cure said holification? Well, there's two options. One is by crushing a human effigy. This restores your humanity and your health bar. Much like everything else in Dark Souls, the game doesn't tell you this. The other option is invading. If you successfully kill someone during an invasion, it'll restore your humanity. However, I am an introvert, so this option was never an option. You could also equip the Ring of Binding, which will slow down your holification by half. So instead of losing 5%, you lose 2.5, and it'll only go down to 75%. But this example alone highlights another big issue I have with Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 is very item reliant in its regulation and progress. The developers knew that a shrinking health bar is a dick move to pull, excuse my language, so they provided two solutions to regulate that mechanic. I don't know, but if the mechanic is that bad, why not just remove it entirely? My other example is the petrified statues across the entire game. These statues block items, rooms, bonfires, or entire areas that, by the way, you need to progress throughout the game. The only way to remove them is with a fragrant branch of yore. So you need this item, especially early on or to access really good loot. Again though, it's a very limited item, and you have to be smart when using them early or say goodbye to your character, Banana Anus. The other thing is the Estus Flask, your main healing item, the Nectar of the Gods. Bottled fire that restores your vitality in the midst of combat is utter garbage in this game. It's like an off-brand version from a discount store. Don't ever try to heal during a boss fight, because it just kind of turns into a wine tasting in the middle of the fight. So what the developers did was add in life gems, a consumable item that gradually restores your HP. They're way faster, you can move while crushing them, And if you get the old lady to come to the hub area, you can purchase an infinite amount. They are way better than the Estus Flask, and I use them about 95% throughout my playthrough. Those are just 3 instances where item consumption is forced, or at least heavily suggested. And let me not forget to mention adaptability. If you've played this game before, then you know what I'm talking about. You know how in other games you can dodge with great invincibility frames? Well, in Dark Souls 2, you start with terrible frames and will easily get caught in most attacks you attempt to dodge. So, you have to spend your hard-earned souls to level up adaptability in order to match the other games. And it's not like 1 or 2 levels. I stopped at around 20, and even then it's kinda low. Personally, I don't get why it's a thing. What do you mean I have to level up a mechanic that's already given to me in about 99% of other games? It baffles me. Lastly, there's a minor change that Scholar of the First Sin does, and that's not giving you the DLC items when you purchase said DLC. You actually have to go out into the world and actively find them in order to access the DLC. Again, it baffles me. No other game does this, and it doesn't make you stand out in a good way when you force me to go on a scavenger hunt to get the freaking keys. But I still love Dark Souls 2. It really is a shame because Dark Souls 2 did have some unique and great ideas, but due to the grand scope of what the developers were trying to accomplish, it all felt incomplete and rushed. It left us with a game that had an identity crisis. This doesn't feel like a Dark Souls game, it feels like an off-brand version of it. But even with all the flaws and different design choices, I really do enjoy this game. And if you're thinking it's nostalgia, that's not the case. I started playing Dark Souls 2 in 2020. I even have a highlight reel back in the day, but it's really cringy, so don't watch it please. I think what I love about Dark Souls 2 the most is its atmosphere and story. One of my favorite video game characters of all time comes from Dark Souls 2. Vendrick, the last king of Drangleic. His story is one of power, manipulation, regret, and ultimately demise. He was once the ruler of Drangleic and the leader of a powerful class of warriors called the Dragon Riders. Now of course they didn't ride horses like ordinary men, but rather wyverns. Once they unified Drangleic, Vendrick proved to be a worthy monarch, one who deserved loyalty and respect. One day, a beautiful woman stepped into the land of Drangleic, and like most fantasy tales, her beauty would win over Vendrick, making her his queen. Her name was Nashandra. Nashandra on the outside was a loving woman who stood by the king's side no matter what he did and was faithful to him and his cause. However, she soon began to whisper dark omens of a rising adversary, an army of giants across the lands. Vendrick, deciding not to stand idle, launched an aggressive assault on the giants in their territory, seemingly defeating them with ease. He would then use captured giants or the remaining souls to create golems, and then build a castle in the name of his loyal queen. As time passed, Vendrick ruled with absolution, but in the process gained knowledge about the history of the world. This ultimately led him and his older brother Aldia to learning about the First Flame. Their decision on what to do with this information was short-lived, as the giants would invade, now led by the Giant Lord. Their forces were too much for Vendrick, and to make matters worse, the First Flame's fire was fading, leading to more undead roaming across the region. His older brother Aldia, with his own interesting story, began to experiment on humans, and even himself, losing his own morality in the process. Vendrick's dragons would rebel, his kingdom suffering its darkest hours. And eventually, Vendrick learned the truth of his beloved Nashandra, a fragment of darkness itself, a daughter of Manus, the father of the Abyss. She desired nothing more than to plunge the world into that very darkness. She fooled Vendrick into gathering all this power, all these souls, only to gain access to the throne of want, and to cast everything into the Abyss. When Vendrick learned of this, he fled deep into the undead crypt, preventing her from fulfilling her plans. Only carrying a handful of soldiers, including Velstadt, he locked himself inside the deepest part of the crypt. Left with only his king's ring, his feeble crown, his mighty sword, and royal robes. Eventually, Vendrick would succumb to the very same curse that he tried so hard to subdue. And this is when we find Vendrick, a shell of the former king he once was, who has lost everything, even his own sanity. Now he wanders aimlessly inside the room, waiting for some sweaty nerd like myself to beat him without getting hit once. Vendrick is, in my opinion, the most important character in Dark Souls 2. He is the catalyst for the current state in which we explore Dark Souls 2. Honestly, an in-depth story about Vendrick would be an instant seller for me. The content is there, you just kinda have to put it in a more modern fashion. And of course, that's just one aspect about the lore in this game. There's his older brother Aldia, who I briefly mentioned, and is a main character in Scholar of the First Sin. There's also Raim, one of Vendrick's knights who fought Velstadt and left with dishonor. He found his way into the Broom Tower, searching for power in the form of dark magic. And that's the Fume Knight. Dark Souls 2 definitely has a different story to tell from the other two games, but I think it's one of the best. You can clearly see the cohesiveness between Dark Souls 1 and 3, but 2 has its own flair that I adore. The story, along with its setting, gave Dark Souls 2 a unique aesthetic, not only to the other Dark Souls games, but in general. The enemy placement ruins a lot of these areas and level designs, but if we're willing to take a step back and actually enjoy the scenery, it's surprisingly well structured. The one that sticks out to me is the Sanctum City, Shulva. I have to give it more thought, but I think this might be my favorite area in Dark Souls 2. It's a giant underground civilization that harbors step-like pyramids and mechanical structures that become more fleshed out the deeper you go. Shulva is not a flat area by no means. You'll be climbing up pyramids and descending deep into the heart of this lost city, fighting your way through dead knights and the invaders who sought the dragon's blood for a chance at higher mortality. This dragon is known as Sin. He was basically a deity to the people of Shulva and was worshipped as a god. When he was discovered, he was found slumbering, and so the king built this city surrounding his resting area to not only protect but to aid in his sleep. Sanctum priestesses would sing lullabies to soothe the dragon, but when the Drakeblood Knights invaded to harvest Sin's blood, he would awaken and flood the entire city in its toxic fumes. Now the city's in ruins, the only person remaining being the queen herself, Alana. Alana, like Nashandra, is also a Shard of Manus, but it's unknown if she truly loved the Sunken King or was going to betray him later down the line. After the desolation of her home, she revealed her true form and is now named Alana the Squalid Queen. Out of curiosity, I looked up what squalid means. When describing a place, extremely dirty and unpleasant, especially as a result of poverty or neglect. Considering the place was abandoned after Sin drenched it in toxic waste, it makes sense to me. Of course, this is just one area out of 300 in Dark Souls 2. And yes, it doesn't ring true about the average quality of this game, but it's still a phenomenal area. When Dark Souls 2 does something right, I think it does it very well. I mean, one of my favorite safe havens in video games is Majula. Firelink Shrine is great, don't get me wrong, but give me this cozy little village any day of the week. The music is also some of the best calming music I've heard in video games. It's very peaceful, but evokes a sense of reflection and wonder. Each time you come here, you're reminded of your purpose and question what it is you really want. That is, to link the fire again or plunge it into darkness. Also, it's a game from 2015, but the atmosphere and lighting here is superb. It seems like all the effort went into this place, which kind of makes sense because you'll be here a lot of the time. Also, Emerald Maiden, best waifu in the series. I don't care what anyone... Well, no, I lied. I do like the Maiden in Black just a little bit better, but Emerald is a close second. Again, Dark Souls 2 did a lot of things differently. While it flopped in the main mechanics of what makes a good game, the gameplay, the supporting factors such as the areas and story is where it shines the best. Although, that's not to say Dark Souls 2 didn't have great ideas that were implemented well. Did you know that dual wielding originated in this game? It was a mechanic where you could fight using two weapons of the same class, but with an entirely unique moveset. Dual wielding even made its way into Elden Ring, and plenty of people, including me, used it a lot, and I still use it. Especially with two giant weapons or two bleed weapons, it was broken when the game first came out. Bonfire Aesthetics was an ingenious item. Essentially, it allows you to reset an area into New Game Plus. For example, I did this in the Black Gulch because the Rotten was right next to the bonfire and provided an unholy amount of souls each time he was defeated. I would reset the area, fight the Rotten on a higher difficulty, and gain mad levels. If there's an important item or some sort of farming you want to do in a specific area, these items, Bonfire Aesthetics, are great for that usage. Or even if you want to just fight your favorite boss again without having to go through New Game Plus. Speaking of New Game Plus, Dark Souls 2 didn't simply get more difficult. There were a variety of changes in the enemy placements, items, equipment, and even boss battles. The Flexile Sentry now has 2 assassin lizards in the fight. Okay, well, is that a good thing? No, but the concept was still there. The idea that a new game changed these things around, I think is great. Was it always implemented the best? No, but again, that idea, phenomenal. It was impressive that they decided to change the formula instead of doing what every other game does for their New Game Plus loop. Besides, you have plenty of build options. Dark Souls 1 was pretty much magic or strength. Not saying others weren't viable or good, but Dark Souls 2 had a wider variety with a better balance of results. The rapier might have been broken, but there were plenty of weapons that weren't too far behind, and some even better against certain bosses. Also, this is where the fashion of this game really picked up because, my goodness, I'm attractive. Dark Souls 2 certainly did a lot wrong objectively. It was an overly ambitious title with new leadership that strayed away from the original outline. Along with the rushed development, it's not hard to see why this game wasn't received as well as the others in the series, especially after Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. Still though, I love this game. Again, I can't justify everything that this game does, but I just like going through the game. Especially when you get into the flow of it, it's basically a huge boss rush. And even if most of the bosses are bad, I still kinda like doing it, so I don't really care. Dark Souls 2 is easily the best, worst game I have ever played. And unless I find another game similar to that, I don't think this game's unique identity won't be going anywhere anytime soon. If you're curious about my rating, I would have to give Dark Souls 2 a solid 7. Compared to the newer FromSoft games and other Souls-likes, it's a testament to how far we've come. Still, it holds a special place in my gaming journey. But of course, that's just what I think. I would love to hear your thoughts about Dark Souls 2, and my voice is leaving me, so I'm going to keep this short. I'm currently going to be playing through the entire Devil May Cry series because, hey, the new Netflix show, super good by the way, and so I'm hopping on that trend, hopefully. We'll see. But if you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and to subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care everyone, and of course, stay safe.